My call to ministry has many pathways. I was raised in the Presbyterian Church at First Presbyterian, Tulsa, Oklahoma. And then in college, I became Southern Baptist. And I was Southern Baptist for 25 years. In fact, this past September, I have been Methodist as long as I was Southern Baptist, finally. And my call occurred while I was in the Baptist church in Ponca City, Oklahoma. And the call followed a time of pain and anger and fear. And I had purchased my dream home, a small blue Victorian house with stained glass windows, in 1984, right after my 30th birthday. And within a few years, Conoco, who is the major employer in Ponca City, Oklahoma, Conoco had a groundwater problem. And they, over the next 3 years, through a lot of maneuvering of people in the area and countering by Conoco, they ended up purchasing 400 homes in a town of 25,000. So basically 400 homes in a town of about 10,000 homes. So that was very significant. And my home was one that was purchased. And I was angry and hurt and fearful. And in the midst of all of that comes this call. And it's like, I don't even like you right now, God. So there is nothing here for us to talk about. And it just was relentless. And I finally called the church office, because this was before internet, and I called the church office and I said, I think I need the addresses of some seminaries. And so the secretary said, well, what seminaries would you like? And I said, I want Southeastern, Southern, Southwestern. And she said, don't you want New Orleans? And I said, we have a seminary in New Orleans? And she said, yes. And I said, well, yeah, send me that. And so they were the first to respond, and they were just beginning a Master of Divinity in Psychology and Counseling, and my first career was social work. And so it was perfect for me. And so I moved to New Orleans, and my life just totally changed in so many ways. And it was such a rich, wonderful time. But after I graduated with my MDiv, I began PhD in counseling and psychology. And in that process, my call began to change, and the professors saw it. And so 4 professors came to me one by one, 4 male professors came to me one by one and said, here's what we think is going on with you. And what they thought was going on is my call had changed to pastoral, but there was nothing for me in the Southern Baptist Convention. And so each of them said, we are praying for you, but there is nothing that we can do to help you. And so then I went to work for Catholic Charities, and I stayed for 4 years with a treatment foster care program, which I loved, and then decided to change programs but stay with the agency. So I applied for a position at Kenner Adult Day Healthcare Center as the executive director. And I was given an address, and the address was 1000 Clay Street. So I showed up at 1000 Clay Street, and it was Kenner United Methodist Church. But nobody had mentioned I was coming to a church. And so I got back in my car and drove around to see if there was someplace that I was supposed to be. And I finally came back and I went to the secretary and I said, I have evidently been given the wrong address. And she said, are you Kathy? And I said, yes. And she said, you are right where you were supposed to be. And truer words never spoken. And so that was September of 1997. And as you can tell, it's still very emotional. And Daryl Tate was the pastor, and he came to me the first day, and he said, can I ask you a question? And I said, well, yes. And he said, why are you doing this? And I said, why am I doing what? And he said, why aren't you serving a church? And I looked at him really strangely, and I said, because I'm a woman. And he said, well, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. And so he began to help me find the road toward ordination, which, coming from another denomination, is very slow, by the way. And so I was ordained. I was commissioned in 2007, ordained in 2010, and I was 55 when I was finally ordained. But I can tell you, none of God's time is wasted, and it was such a beautiful experience in that journey. So the story that I will never forget happened while I was at Mulholland United Methodist Church as associate pastor. At that time, I was a local pastor, and this was an off-site wedding of non-members. And so I had to get permission from the bishop in order to do this wedding. And it was held at the Retiree VFW, and the groom was the DJ. And we had the rehearsal on Thursday night for a Saturday night wedding. And so as I was leaving the rehearsal, it had gone great. As I was leaving the rehearsal, I asked the bride, I said, by the way, what is it that you would like me to wear? Do you want me to wear my clergy robe, or do you want me to wear like a suit? And she said, well, whatever you're comfortable with. And I said, well, given the setting, let's go with a suit. And what are the colors of your wedding so I won't clash? And she said, do you know the color of a Crown Royal bag? And I said, yes, kind of a royal purple. And she said, yes. And she said, this is a Crown Royal themed wedding. And it was one of those moments where your entire face changes without anything changing. And she looked at me and she said, oh, is that a problem? And I said, well, I don't know, but I'm thinking I should have known this by now, because I do 5 sessions of premarital counseling. So by the time I get to the wedding, I know this couple inside and out. And we hadn't discussed Crown Royal at all. And so on my way back home, I was in tears because I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired. This will be the last wedding I ever do of my life. And I began to ask myself, what would Bishop Hutchinson do? And then finally, by the time I got home, the question became not what would Bishop Hutchinson do, but what would Jesus do? And I decided that Jesus would join in that celebration. And he would meet that couple where they were, even if it was a Crown Royal themed wedding. And I promise you, Crown Royal theme was splashed all over that VFW hall that night. And it was the only wedding that I took pictures of myself, and it is the only wedding that I have a scrapbook layout to depict what happened that night. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I think the number one person who helped me along this journey is George Durson. George had been the pastor of the Kenner Church, and he ended up being my mentor from really beginning to end. And when Freddie Henderson was my first district superintendent. When Freddie called George to ask him if he would meet with me, George said, I will meet with her one time. And this was the summer of 1998. So we met one time in May of 1998, and we spent the entire summer meeting one time per week, talking about movement from the Southern Baptist Convention to the United Methodist Church, and what were the things that would hang me up, and literally with the Baptist faith and message in one hand and the United Methodist discipline in the other, and just looking at what are the things that I'm going to trip over if I'm not careful, and what are the things I can't deal with, and what a gift that man gave to me. It started me out on such solid footing as I moved from one denomination to the other. The other person that comes always to mind is Reverend Bill Rowell. He was the pastor at the Kenner Church, and that's the church where I came into ministry. And he walked that pathway with me also, he and his wife Betty, who is still one of my dear friends. And Bill was supposed to stand with me for my ordination, but he died a few weeks before. But I wore his robe at my ordination, and continue to today to wear his stoles. And without those two men in my life, I don't know that I would have made this journey, or at least would not have made it as successfully as I have. Other people that come to mind are my many colleagues who have served on the Board of Ordained Ministry, because that has been such a rich time, as I have spent 12 years serving on the Board of Ordained Ministry and helping candidates come into ministry, helping them find their way through this journey, and helping them come toward their own ordination and to realize God's call in their life. And beyond that, there are so many more people I could mention, but if I start mentioning people, I'm going to leave someone out. but really all of my colleagues in ministry, we support one another in ways that we don't even realize. I will mention one more name. Mary Jo Babcock, one of the remaining 3 diaconal ministers in our conference, has kept me from killing myself and others so many times, and has been my partner in crime from my time at the Mansfield and Grand Cane Charge to today. And what a gift she's been in my life.